In July 2020, inside a luxury apartment building in Manhattan, a young tech entrepreneur vanished behind the closed doors of his own home. His name was Fahim Saleh. At just 33 years old, he had already built companies across continents, becoming known as an ambitious founder with roots in Bangladesh and a reputation for seeing opportunity where others saw risk. To the outside world, he was successful, driven, and surrounded by possibility. But inside that New York apartment, something had gone terribly wrong. Inside that apartment was a scene so disturbing, it would shock investigators, horrify family members, and make headlines around the world. This is the story of that young entrepreneur, his New York apartment, and what went down inside it in July 2020. This is the story of Fahim Saleh. Hi everyone, welcome to the Desi Crime Podcast, a show where we dive deep into some of the craziest cases from around South Asia. I'm your host Aishwarya.
And I'm Aryaan.
And the case that I have for you today is one that's so vivid in its imagery, to this day I remember where I was when I heard of it.
This is one of those cases that's too close to home, but not really close to home. It happened, I remember so vividly, I think a month into starting Desi Crime.
Yeah.
We were in the States when it happened. I know you guys called me out for saying that all the time, but it's a fact. We were there and it's something that was on our feeds. Everybody in the college knew that this entrepreneur, this budding CEO, found dead not just in the most brutal manners, but in one of the most mysterious manners, because if I'm not wrong, it was in his penthouse in Manhattan.
Correct. In a very luxury apartment building that he had a home in and was supposed to be a safe space for him. But then very quickly, right after the murder came to light, a lot of CCTV footage in this case continued to generate interest. And that's why it stayed on our feeds for even longer than a regular case would have, where there wasn't, just a regular slow investigation. This one so quickly had so many developments, so much footage to parse through, that it was just there all the time.
I remember back then that there wasn't enough in terms of figuring out what really happened to this guy.
Mm-hmm.
We didn't cover it on Desi Crime. It's found its way into our catalog 6 years on.
Yeah.
I still have no idea what happened to him. I read his profile back then of how ambitious the South Desi guy, killing it
Absolutely.
in the world of entrepreneurship. And then he met the end, this fateful end. So take us to that day in New York. And before you do, guys, please hit the subscribe button, become a patron, do all that stuff that creators say they have to do. We don't really love forcing you to do it, but we have to, and so we will. But with that, on with the case for today.
The elevator opened directly into the apartment. That was the selling point. The privacy, the exclusivity, the sense that this home was built for someone who had truly arrived. And on the afternoon of July 14th, 2020, it was a detail that would make a detective's stomach drop. Fahim Saleh's cousin had not heard from him in over 24 hours. That alone was enough to worry her. Fahim was the kind of person who never went quiet, who was always somewhere in the world, always building something. So she buzzed his apartment from the lobby of the building on East Houston Street in Manhattan's Lower East Side. But nothing. She took the elevator up to the 7th floor. The doors opened, and what she walked into was something no one should ever have to see. Fahim's torso lay on a tarp in the middle of the living room. Around it, plastic construction bags, the kind you order in bulk off of Amazon, were tied shut and placed in a neat row. His head and limbs had been severed and placed inside those bags. A battery-powered electric saw, a Makita, sat nearby, still plugged in, its blade still dirty. The apartment smelled of blood and cleaning solution. Somebody had been there, had been in the middle of something, and had left in a hurry. Detectives from the NYPD's 7th Precinct arrived within the hour. Their first read of the scene was unusual. Despite the grotesque horror of what they were looking at, the apartment had been partially cleaned. Very little blood remained on the floor. The tarp was deliberate. The bags had been pre-ordered. The saw was not something bought at last minute in a panic. Whoever had done this had planned it and planned it carefully. A law enforcement source described the scene to reporters as looking, quote, professional. That word hung in the air. The medical examiner's report would later confirm that Fahim Saleh had died the previous day, July 13th, from 5 stab wounds to the neck and torso. The dismemberment had happened much after death, which meant whoever had killed Fahim the day before had left the apartment, gone home, slept on it, returned the next morning with a saw and construction bags, and resumed. And then they had been interrupted mid-task. The police were now wondering, was the killer interrupted by the buzzer when Fahim's cousin came? Was the killer right there just moments ago? And surprisingly, the answer won't stay hidden for long. Detectives obtained the building's surveillance footage within hours, and what they found there was both chilling and clarifying. The footage from the afternoon of July 13th showed Fahim returning to the building from a morning run, dressed in athletic wear at around 1:40 in the afternoon. Behind him in the elevator was a second figure, dressed entirely in black, wearing a custom black suit and an opaque mask over his face so that not a centimeter of skin was visible.
And this was 2020, the
Correct.
awful time of that one virus that
Right.
seems like an archaic historic fact now. And so masks were common.
They were common.
And this didn't stand out,
No, not
which
at all.
otherwise it would completely have.
100%. Now, this figure had waited in the stairwell of the lobby since 8:30 that morning, 5 hours, before slipping in behind someone else who had a keycard. When the elevator doors opened into Fahim's apartment, the footage showed the masked figure producing a taser and pressing it onto Fahim's back. Fahim dropped, the elevator doors closed. The rest happened out of view. But here was something else that the footage showed. They had also been captured on camera leaving the building at around 3 in the afternoon on the 13th, after the killing, but before the dismemberment, and taking an Uber into Jersey City. They had discarded some evidence in a garbage can nearby, and then they had returned the next morning with the saw. While investigators were reviewing all this footage with Fahim's cousin, she said something that made investigators jump in their chairs. She knew that walk. She knew the build. She had seen that figure before in a context so mundane, so ordinary, that it made the whole thing somehow more disturbing. It was Tyrese, she said. His name was Tyrese Devon Haspel. He was 21 years old. He had worked for Fahim for 5 years. And just one day after leaving the apartment with the body still on its floor, he had been captured on a different camera buying birthday balloons from a store in the NoHo neighborhood of Manhattan. The balloons spelled out the number 22. They were for his girlfriend. He had paid for them with Fahim's credit card. To understand how Fahim Saleh ended up in that apartment, you have to first understand how extraordinary it was that he was ever there to begin with. He was born on December 12, 1986, in Mecca, Saudi Arabia, to Bangladeshi parents. His father, Ahmed Saleh, worked as a software consultant for IBM, a detail that is technically relevant to Fahim's eventual career, but that Fahim always pushed back on. He didn't inherit the tech gene, he'd say. He got it from video games. His family moved around a great deal during his childhood: Saudi Arabia, Louisiana, Rochester, New York, before settling in Poughkeepsie, a city in the Hudson Valley roughly 90 miles north of Manhattan. He grew up in a modest, close-knit immigrant household with 2 sisters, in a home where ambition was expected, but resources were limited. Fahim was, by most accounts, a shy kid. He was not the kind of person who walked into rooms and commanded them. He was quiet, internal, the sort who spent hours alone in front of a screen. But inside that introversion was something unusually focused, unusually hungry. By the time he was in the 8th grade, he had built his first website, a family site called salehfamily.com that his father would enthusiastically direct relatives to at parties. By high school, he had built a social network for teenagers called teenhangout.com, which made him a few dollars a month, which he sold on eBay for $2,000 and reinvested into his next idea. By the time he was 16, Fahim's high school projects were pulling in $100,000 to $50,000 a year. He was building websites around youth culture, AIMdude.com, MSNDolls.com, and others that tapped into the early social web's appetite for teen-oriented content. It was unsophisticated stuff by the standards of what he would later build, but it was real money made by a teenager in a bedroom in upstate New York who had never had a mentor, never had a network, never had anyone hand him an opportunity. He eventually enrolled at Bentley University in Massachusetts in 2006, studying computer information systems. And while there, he launched the venture that would make him a millionaire before graduation. Prankdial.com was exactly what it sounds like. A website that let users send pre-recorded prank phone calls anonymously. Absurd concept, enormous business.
I mean, I would be a.
You are the prime candidate.
I would have been a platinum user
Right.
if I had the money and knowledge of this service. I mean, prank calling is my, core memory from childhood.
Just cannot relate to this.
I mean,
at
yeah.
all.
I mean, I've talked about all the
he
prank
has.
calls you've done in previous episodes, but yeah. So this is the kid that you hear about, and you're like, what am I doing with my life?
Right.
You look at those founders and athletes that have made $1 bajillion, and then you look at their age, 19, 21.
Yeah.
I'm like, dude, that guy won.
But it's so interesting to me that what he was doing at the time probably elicited a different response from people when he would have come up with prankdial.com.
Oh, sure.
That's not how he would have been viewed.
Yeah.
And there must have been pushback. There must have been a culture of South Asian people saying, what the hell are you trying to do? You're studying computer system softwares and this is what you come up with?
It's like what
But-
Zuckerberg's precursor to Facebook was a revenge website
Right.
on his girlfriend, that way you rate how women look. I mean, a very derogatory undertaking.
Correct.
But again, that showed that while negative, but a zeal, an
There is something
entrepreneurial
in
zeal.
this person
There is
to
something in
do
this person
something, yeah.
that he's creating something coded by his social environment of being a teenager, but there's that spark.
Yeah, and he will do something with
Yeah.
it. By the time Fahim graduated in 2009, Prankdial had generated more than $10 million in revenue. He had been a self-made millionaire before he was old enough to rent a car. After graduation, Fahim did not do what most people do with that kind of money. He didn't settle into a comfortable life in New York, managing his Prankdial royalties and watching his portfolio grow. He was restless in a particular way. Not the restlessness of someone looking for comfort, but of someone looking for meaning. He wrote in a 2018 essay for Forbes that after Prankdial, he had started asking himself a different question. Quote, how can I use my abilities to make humanity better than what it was before I created this product? That question would lead him to Bangladesh. In 2014, Fahim packed up and moved to Dhaka. Bangladesh was his parents' homeland, a country he had strong cultural ties to but had never really lived in. He set up a tech incubator there, Hack House Dhaka, and began funding and mentoring young Bangladeshi entrepreneurs. Most of those ideas failed. Then, in 2015, a young man named Hussein M. Elias walked in with a pitch for a ride-sharing service built specifically for Dhaka's chaotic, motorcycle-dominated streets. Fahim co-founded and co-funded that company. They called it Pathao. Pathao became one of the great startup success stories to emerge from South Asia in the 21st century. At its peak, it was the largest ride-sharing service in Bangladesh, handling bikes, cars, food delivery, parcel services, digital payments, and more. With operations in Nepal as well, it was valued at over $100 million. And Fahim's fingerprints were all over it. His initial capital, his product instincts, his insistence on building for the real needs of the people in the developing world rather than copying Silicon Valley playbooks. Energized by what Pathao had become, Fahim turned his attention to Nigeria in 2017. Lagos was, and he believed, the next great opportunity. Africa's most populous city, impossibly congested, desperately in need of exactly the kind of nimble, last-minute transport solution that had worked in Dhaka. That's when he founded Gokada in 2018, a motorcycle ride-hailing service that within 2 years had over 1,000 drivers, had completed nearly 1 million rides, had raised $5.3 million in Series A funding, and was on the verge of profitability. His friends described him as the Elon Musk of the developing world. He played the ukulele, he collected sneakers, he tweeted on January 1st, 2020, "Have a very good feeling about 2020. Then, on January 27th, the Lagos state government announced a sweeping ban on commercial motorcycles across the city. Gokada, which operated exclusively in Lagos and exclusively in ride-hailing, was obliterated overnight. 2 days later, Fahim laid off 80% of the company's workforce. 800 drivers lost their primary income. Fahim made an emotional video appeal to the government, which was widely shared and widely criticized for its tone, and announced a pivot to delivery services, which he called cockroach mode. He was in New York at the time, trying to manage the crisis remotely, and by July, he was doing it while also trying to manage something far more personal and far more dangerous. Tyrese Devon Haspel grew up in a world very different from Fahim Saleh's, even if the surface geography was similar. Both were products of the New York metro area. Both had an early aptitude for technology. Both showed a hunger that set them apart from their peers. But where Fahim had the stability of a two-parent household, a father with a professional career, and a mother who pushed her children towards achievement, Tyrese had almost none of that. His mother was committed to a psychiatric institution when he was still a child. He was raised primarily by his grandmother, who did her best but couldn't hold it all together. When his grandmother died, his aunt Marjorie Singh took him in but eventually turned him over to foster care at 17, describing him as increasingly difficult to manage. His father died a year after that. And yet, in high school, Tyrese won an award at a state FBLA convention for website design. He enrolled at Hofstra University on Long Island. He was, by every account, sharp, ambitious, but also deeply unexpressive. Quote, he never showed his emotions, his Aunt Marjorie told the Daily News. His behavior, the way he was, he always acted nonchalant. End quote. Not violent, not scary, just sealed. Tyrese was 16 years old when he first started working for Fahim Saleh. The exact circumstances of how they met are not part of public record, but by 2018, when Tyrese was 21, the arrangement had formalized into a full-time role as Fahim's executive assistant. It was a position of unusual trust. Tyrese handled Fahim's personal finances and his corporate finances. He managed his calendar, his properties, his accounts. He looked after Fahim's dog. He was, in the parlance of the startup world, a chief of staff in all but name. The person who kept a high-velocity founder's life running while the founder's mind was somewhere else. And Fahim seems to have genuinely cared about Tyrese. People who knew both of them described the dynamic as mentor-mentee as much as boss and employee. Fahim was the same person who had listened to a 17-year-old boy in Dhaka pitch him a startup idea, who had funded it on instinct, who had changed that boy's life. That's the kind of man Fahim was. He saw potential in young people in under-resourced circumstances, and he acted on what he saw. Tyrese, from a background as difficult as it was, had clearly demonstrated something. The website award, the Hofstra enrollment, the aptitude for technology. Fahim took a bet on him. But then, sometime in the fall of 2018, just months after Tyrese had moved into the full-time role, the stealing began. Prosecutors would later establish that Tyrese used two distinct methods to drain money from Fahim's account. The first was direct transfers from corporate accounts, moving money quietly in amounts small enough not to immediately trigger alerts. The second was through a fake PayPal account he had created under the name Nethertech Switzerland, a fictitious company, a phantom vendor that he used to siphon funds in transactions that looked at a glance like legitimate business expenses. And he did this successfully for over a year. He had done it so well, in fact, that by January 2020, when Fahim discovered what had been happening, Tyrese had stolen roughly $90,000. The discovery and what Fahim did next is the detail that haunts everyone who knows the story. Fahim did not call the police. Fahim did not terminate Tyrese immediately. He did not make the call that every lawyer, every rational bystander would have told him to make. Instead, he confronted Tyrese privately, extracted a confession, and offered him a deal. He would repay the stolen money in installments over 2 years, and Fahim would not press charges. There would be no arrest, no criminal record, just a repayment plan between two people who had built something together. The generosity of this, in retrospect, is almost unbearable. Here was a man who had come from nothing, who had built everything himself without anyone handing him a safety net, choosing to extend to the person who had stolen from him the same kind of grace he had always extended to young people he believed in. He gave Tyrese a second chance. And Tyrese Haspel, rather than taking it, began planning how to make sure he would never have to face the consequences of being given one. In the first half of 2020, as the world descended into COVID lockdowns and Gokada fought for its survival in Lagos, Tyrese was still stealing, even after being caught. The repayment plan was in effect, some money had moved, but even while making installment payments on the original theft, Tyrese had resumed taking. The Nethertech Switzerland PayPal account was still active. The amounts were growing. And at some point in those months, prosecutors placed it in the spring of 2020, Tyrese arrived at a calculation. The logic of it was cold and horrible. He had agreed to a repayment plan, yes, but the original stolen amount was now the least of his problems. He had kept stealing after the agreement, meaning a second discovery would not end with another private confrontation. It would end with a police report. And a police report would mean charges, and charges would mean a record, a trial, a conviction. Everything he had built, the Hofstra enrollment, the prestigious job, the access to a world he hadn't grown up in, would all collapse. There was only one way to prevent that from happening, and it was the same way humans have been eliminating witnesses since the beginning of recorded history. Tyrese spent months planning the murder of Fahim Saleh. Now, this is not a reconstruction, it is what the evidence showed at trial. He researched dismemberment online. He searched the phrase dismembered body, and after the killing, quote, murder of tech CEO in New York. He pre-ordered the construction bags from Amazon. He purchased the Makita electric saw. He got the tarp. He scouted the timing. He knew Fahim's running schedule, knew when he came back to the building in the early afternoons. He custom ordered a black suit and sourced an opaque mask. He researched the depth of the Hudson River and how to weigh objects down to make them sink. He had thought about everything, or almost everything. On the morning of July 13th, 2020, Tyrese arrived at Fahim's building on East Houston Street at 8:30 in the morning. He was wearing the black suit and the mask. He did not have a keycard for the building, so he waited in the stairwell near the lobby for someone else to enter, then slipped in behind them. Then he waited some more. 5.5 hours in a building stairwell in a suit with a taser and a knife, waiting for the man who had once seen something great in him. Fahim came back just before 2 in the afternoon. The surveillance camera caught him walking into the lobby, and behind him, close, deliberate, having timed his approach to the second, the black-suited figure followed him into the elevator. The doors closed. They rode up to the 7th floor in silence. When the doors opened into Fahim's apartment, Tyrese pressed the taser into his back, and Fahim dropped to the floor. And then Tyrese took out the knife. Quote, I tased him in the back. I remember tasing him in the back. I took out a knife and I started aiming for the neck, he would say at trial. The medical examiner would confirm 5 stab wounds to the neck and torso. Death would have come quickly. Then, at approximately 3 in the afternoon, Tyrese left the apartment, took an Uber to Jersey City, and discarded some of the evidence he was carrying. That evening, he attempted to dispose of some of the materials in a garbage can. Then he went home. He appears to have slept. The next morning, July 14th, he returned to the apartment with the saw and resumed. He had placed the body on the tarp and begun the dismemberment when the buzzer in the lobby sounded. Fahim's cousin was downstairs.
Aishwarya, I'm assuming this is a very high-profile building. It's one of those Manhattan skyscrapers that Fahim is living in, right?
Yeah.
So I'm guessing it has security protocols for who is
Correct.
let in and not. Was this a lapse in security, or was this just a familiar face in the form of
No.
Tyrese, who is clearly an EA to this guy and therefore probably going in and out of his house anyway for the errands he runs? He takes care of the dog. So maybe like the guard downstairs was just, oh, that's Tyrese.
It doesn't quite seem like that's what it is, because we can see from the video footage that he's quite literally entering the building behind someone who has a key card. He's not there taking his mask off and saying, hey, it's me, I've forgotten the key inside, let me in. That's not what is happening. He's trying to make himself as hidden and concealing his identity as long as he can, even from the guard, it seems like. So he's walking in behind someone else who's entered. So it's a lapse in security in that a person has entered behind someone else, but it's the kind of lapse that is so normal.
We see, you correct for this by not letting randos without security clearances enter the building. That's basic stuff. Normal Brooklyn, Manhattan apartments that are not like elite skyscrapers have that key card that you use to enter. It's usually an app that you have. So I can see in those why it's easier to enter. In really high profile skyscrapers, there is almost always somebody at the gate who's sitting, who at least has an eye on who's coming in and out. I'm worried that this was a lapse in security.
Yeah, it is.
But also, it makes me think of all those, racist Karen videos you see, where anytime there is an unfamiliar face, or perhaps the face of a, somebody from a minority, like a black person or a brown person, the Karen goes wild and she starts saying, I'll report you to the police. Who are you? Which is a very uncomfortable thing to watch, because as a minority, being questioned for being in your own building is so dehumanizing.
Right.
But then you hear of these cases And I'm sure the Karens feel vindicated insofar as this is what we don't want to happen. It's such a. I can totally see this being one of those clips and cases that consolidates every Karen's belief that I need to check
Yeah, our
on.
suspicions are
Yeah, our
founded and we need to be on guard.
I'd
and we
rather
need
be
to-
called racist than be
die.
killed. Yeah. And again, that's not how it works. But these are the rationalizations people with preconceived notions arrive at because of news like these.
Now, once Fahim's cousin buzzed the apartment, Tyrese heard it. He got scared. He fled through the building's back exit. Then, and this is the detail that stops people cold every time they hear it, he went shopping. Security cameras in the NoHo neighborhood captured him at a balloon store later that afternoon, buying balloons that spelled out 22 because his girlfriend was turning 22. He was apparently celebrating. He had paid with Fahim's card. He was also photographed in the days that followed at APC and Christian Louboutin, bags in hand, spending money from the accounts of the man whose body he had left in construction bags on a tarp. Now, because of all of this evidence, the identification of Tyrese as the killer took place in less than 4 days. In the world of cold cases and unsolved murders, this was practically instantaneous. The taser he had used left behind what are called anti-felon identification discs, AFIDs, which are tiny numbered tags that spray out from a taser cartridge on deployment and are designed precisely for situations like this, to identify the device used, and through it, the person who fired it. Tyrese had used a handheld vacuum to try and collect them from Fahim's apartment floor, but he hadn't gotten them all. When crime scene technicians swept the apartment, they found the few discs he had missed. Additionally, the surveillance footage was damning. NYPD Chief of Detective Rodney Harrison described it at a press conference as overwhelming. The prosecuting attorney told the courtroom at arraignment, quote, "He has been identified by at least 2 individuals from the videotape," end quote. On July 17, 2020, 4 days after the murder, NYPD detectives arrested Tyrese at 8:45 in the morning in Lower Manhattan. He was charged with second-degree murder. He was held without bail. He was just 21 years old. In the weeks and months that followed, as prosecutors built their case, the picture that emerged was one of meticulous, premeditated intent. This was not a crime of passion. This was not a sudden eruption of violence from someone who snapped under pressure. The fake PayPal account, the pre-ordered bags, the months of research, the 5-hour wait in the stairwell. Prosecutors also estimated the total amount stolen from Fahim's businesses at approximately $400,000, far beyond the original $90,000 that had triggered the repayment plan.
$500,000 stolen from a man
Yeah.
who was gracious.
Yes.
I mean,
Who would have put that money behind an idea?
It wouldn't have given me any solace if this murder resembled the Luigi case where you are angered by a CEO. It would have still been a hopeless crime, but I would have understood it.
Yeah.
Here you're just, ungrateful doesn't do it justice.
Yeah, it doesn't.
Bad person doesn't do it justice either. It's just, I mean, this man gave you a second. He could have easily reported you to the police, have you imprisoned, and dusted. You're gone. Your life's
it's
ruined.
done.
He gave you a second chance. You stole more. I do want to say, you're right in saying that this was pre-planned intent. But oh my God, was it not meticulously planned?
Not at all.
This
Not
was
even a little bit.
Very
shoddily planned crime.
I would hope that this kid who is allegedly smart would have known that he's getting caught.
100%.
When you're using credit cards, I mean, had he done everything right?
You've murdered him in the middle of the day in a security surveillance covered building.
Everything right. But using the credit card of the victim would have easily pinged it.
Yeah.
You would have easily
100%.
been pinged. You didn't need CCTV footage. So clearly, this such a greedy person that you could have done everything right and the credit card would have pinned it back to you, and you did that and so much more incorrectly.
Yeah. It's baffling. I agree.
He might be a good website designer, but that's the limit of his intellect.
Now, with this new stolen number and more details in account, in October 2020, a grand jury returned an indictment on upgraded charges: first-degree murder, second-degree grand larceny on multiple counts, second-degree burglary, concealment of a human corpse, and tampering with physical evidence. The first-degree murder charge was significant. It required prosecutors to prove not just that Tyrese had killed Fahim, but that he had done so specifically to prevent Fahim from testifying against him in a criminal proceeding. The language of the indictment was precise. Saleh, quote, was a witness to a crime committed on a prior occasion, and the death was caused for the purpose of preventing the intended victim's testimony in any criminal action or proceeding, end quote. Tyrese pleaded not guilty on all counts. His attorney urged the public to, quote, keep an open mind, suggesting there was, quote, much more to this narrative than the accusations. But the trial would not begin for nearly 4 years. Between Tyrese's arrest in July 2020 and the beginning of his trial in the spring of 2024, the world changed several times over. The pandemic peaked and receded. Fahim Saleh's company, Gokada and Patao, continued without him, carrying his vision forward in corridors he would never walk again. His family, his friends, the young entrepreneurs he had mentored in Dhaka and Lagos and New York, mourned in the particular suspended animation way that families of murder victims mourn when a case hasn't been resolved yet. The delay in trial was not unusual for New York court systems, especially in the COVID era. Proceedings were pushed and rescheduled. Motions were filed. In the meantime, the defense developed its strategy that Tyrese had committed the crime in a state of extreme emotional disturbance, a legal term in New York that, if accepted by a jury, would reduce a murder charge from first degree to first-degree manslaughter and significantly lower the sentencing exposure.
Just for some clarification here, the criminal justice system in the state of New York, more specifically in the city of New York, is very progressive.
Right.
Which basically means that it is more about the rehabilitation rather than punishment. Mm-hmm. That sometimes is at odds with what the people want in terms of that sense of justice.
And this is in juxtaposition to states like Texas, where incarceration rates are so high, rehabilitation programs are not quite what they are in states like New York or California.
Right. And US is a country of the pendulum swinging very left and very right. Correct. And common sense tends to be missed in that process. An example of this missed common sense, something I found out when I was in New York. I used to see people shoplift all the time in front of me.
See people shoplift?
See people shoplift. Aishwarya, I used to see people, like, I remember, I think it was a Trader Joe's. It was just this guy that's just putting stuff in his pockets. I was seeing the people see it and they couldn't do anything about it because you fear the person who is shoplifting might have a knife. And so for $50, $100, $250 worth of merchandise, why would you as a minimum wage employee risk your life? But the law allows you to do it insofar as any shoplifting under $1,000, i.e. 90,000 rupees, is not a felony. It is a misdemeanor charge. So people feel, if it's a minor misdemeanor of larceny that is being imposed, it's not something the police are going to treat as important or, attend to.
That is so absurd
in a
to
city
me.
riddled with crime like New York. Mm-hmm. And so when we talk about first degree murder and first degree manslaughter, both are first degree, so both have preemptive pre-planning baked in, but the difference between them is that first degree murder is done for profit.
Correct.
Some form of profit. Yep. That is the worst kind of crime in terms of the law, in terms of the punishment you'll get. First degree manslaughter is pre-planned, but the motive is not one that is profit-oriented.
Correct.
And so what they are trying to argue is that the motive was convoluted, that it had more layers of emotion baked in.
He was so emotionally disturbed. There was so much going on. And so he snapped in this moment. There was planning, yes, but the logic was a lot more convoluted than him just wanting to steal from Fahim and hide the fact that he had been stealing and not want to go to prison for his stealing.
And so this is important for the nerds of true crime to know that both first degree charges would result in life imprisonment. The difference is first degree might carry a longer life sentence, multiple life sentences, and it will not have eventual bail or eventual parole possible, whereas first degree manslaughter under emotional certain whatever circumstances might have that. This is still a question of might. Right? But rehabilitating somebody that does crime for profit is not as plausible as somebody who did it in a state of emotional distress. That's the argument. That's the sort of jurisprudence here that I think it's helpful for people to know.
That's exactly it. The argument, as the defense framed it, was not that Tyrese hadn't killed Fahim. It was that his disturbed psychological state, his troubled upbringing, the abuse he had endured in foster care, the pressure of his circumstances mitigated the degree of his culpability. Defense attorney Sam Roberts, in his arguments, drew on Tyrese's childhood. Quote, "We fully believe that Tyrese is not solely and only the worst thing that he's done in his life," Roberts said. There was an argument to be made here, a real one, about the relationship between childhood trauma and adult violence, about the failures of the systems that was supposed to catch children like Tyrese before they fell. But prosecutors had the evidence, and oh, they had so much of it. And they had a witness who could prove to be the most devastating of all, Tyrese himself.
These arguments that the defense was making belong on the Senate floor or the Congress floor.
And they belong in philosophy textbooks.
They belong in a philosophy classroom.
Or jurisprudence textbooks.
Or a mock court setting.
Right.
They do not belong in an actual court where it is the state defending a victim of murder versus an individual who committed it. Laws have baked in philosophy that can be discussed in seminars and can be discussed on the floors of where these laws are made. Mm-hmm. But once these laws are made, you cannot argue philosophically the deterministic factors that made somebody who they are, because that applies
to everybody.
Everybody. Almost everybody, unless they are a psychopath. And even for psychopaths, there are arguments.
So many factors that we now know are true for their lives.
People commit crimes for a reason.
Yeah.
And those reasons cannot indemnify them.
And those reasons are sad, and they come from education and poverty and abuse and whatnot, but that's true for everybody. Every criminal. Tyrese took the stand at his own trial. This was a choice that surprised many legal observers. Given the weight of the evidence against him, the conventional wisdom was that putting him in front of the jury was a risk his defense team couldn't afford to take. But the extreme emotional disturbance defense required him to explain his state of mind. And to explain his state of mind, he had to testify. What he said was extraordinary in its calm matter-of-factness. He confirmed that he had followed Fahim into the elevator. He confirmed that he had tased him in the back. He described in the flat affect that everyone who had ever known him recognized the moment the doors opened and he pressed the weapon against the back of the man who had mentored him, employed him, trusted him. The prosecution cross-examined. And then, on June 24th, 2024, after deliberations, the verdict came. Guilty on all counts: first-degree murder, grand larceny, burglary, concealment of a human corpse, evidence tampering. Every single charge the district attorney had brought, the jury had agreed to. The extreme emotional disturbance defense had failed. The jury had looked at all of it and concluded that whatever Tyrese's childhood had been, whatever pain he carried, none of it explained or excused what he had done to Fahim with such deliberate, methodical, extended intent. Sentencing was scheduled for September 10th, 2024. And that sentencing hearing lasted more than 2 hours. It was a proceeding full of grief. Fahim's family members spoke about the man he was, about the void his absence had left, about what it meant to go 4 years without justice and now be sitting in a room where justice was about to be administered. District Attorney Alvin Bragg described Fahim as, quote, "a kind, generous and empathetic person who positively impacted the world." Representatives from Patao and Gokada had released statements when the verdict came in. There was a whole ecosystem of people across Bangladesh, Nigeria and the New York startup world who felt this loss, not as a statistic, not as a headline, but as a personal absence. Defense attorney Sam Roberts made his final case for leniency. He asked the court to avoid what he called a de facto life sentence, citing Tyrese's youth, his background, his trauma, his potential for rehabilitation. It was, as defense attorneys do, the most human framing possible of a situation that resisted humanization. Then, more than 2 hours into the proceeding, something that nobody expected had happened in the courtroom. Tyrese, who had listened in silence through the arguments for a lighter sentence, spoke up. He disagreed with his own attorney. In that flat tone that defined him, he told the court, quote, "Unlike my counsel, I don't think anything less than life without parole would be appropriate." Unlike my counsel, I don't think anything less than life without parole would be appropriate. The room went quiet. Nobody quite knew what to do with that. Here was a man who had spent 4 years behind bars, whose legal team had worked to frame him as a young man shaped by impossible circumstances, throwing away the entire argument in a single sentence. Was it genuine remorse? Was it a performance? No one could say. Tyrese Haspel had always been a sealed room. Judge Ellen Biben sentenced him to 40 years to life in state prison. He is required to pay full restitution to Fahim's companies. Today, he sits in a New York State correctional facility and will be eligible for parole in 2064, at which point he'll be 64 years old. The last words Tyrese said to the court were those, and they closed a chapter. Not cleanly, not without a lingering strangeness, but they closed it on a case that had shaken the South Asian diaspora, the Nigerian tech ecosystem, the Bangladeshi startup world, and anyone who had ever believed in the transformative power of second chances. Fahim Saleh was 33 years old when he died. He didn't leave behind biological heirs, but he left behind legacies. Gokada survived. It pivoted to delivery services under new leadership and became a meaningful player in Lagos's last mile logistics ecosystem, completing over 1 million deliveries in less than a year. Pathao is still one of the largest ride-sharing platforms in Bangladesh. The ventures Fahim built outlasted him, which is, in some sense, what every entrepreneur hopes for.
If you like what we do here at Desi Studios and absolutely love what we're wearing today, this is merch you can go buy all for yourself.
You can buy this Desi Crime merch in our YouTube store on the link down below at Karak Merch. Keep the engines at Desi Studios rolling so we can pay our videographer right behind the camera to make these amazing episodes just for you.